Emma, hello.
Hello, hi.
For those who don't know you, who's Emma?
My name's Emma Reeves. I'm a writer. I write particularly quite a lot of children's TV. I've also done stage and audio. My work includes quite a few sort of sci-fi children's dramas for CBBC, and also I've written for Big Finish.
Oh, no, he said Big Finish. My heart just went. No, then the other stuff's also brilliant too, but so what made you want to be a writer?
I suppose I was always very well. I loved reading books. I was very into stories. I loved acting. I was an actor for a while, and then I suppose it kind of evolved out of that, really.
And what do you think the most important thing is about being a writer? What is it? Why are stories so important to people?
Um, I suppose they sort of find us ways of relating to the world. I think a lot of things that we understand or the way we explain concepts to ourselves are in the form of a story. That's why people often sort of use stories as mnemonics to try and remember a list of random objects or something. I think it's a way of understanding life, and I think there are lots of experiences in life. I think we're interested in things we haven't experienced. We're interested in other people's take on things we have experienced. So, you know, um, on the one hand, you sort of, it can be fascinating to sort of read or hear or watch a story set in a world that you know very little of, like, I don't know, LA gangs or Indian very poor district or something. But on the other hand, sometimes um, there's a joy in thinking, oh my God, I feel the same too. And I suppose what with stories, quite often you get an unfamiliar setting, such as the ones I mentioned, but then you realize universal truths about people, and people have the same emotions and sometimes behave according to the same motives, and different sorts of archetypal people exist everywhere. Um, yeah, I don't know.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think whether it's Doctor Who or whatever, Aliens, there's always that connection story wise. There's always something you kind of relate to.
Yeah.
Personally, I love cinema for the sole reason that for me it's escapism. It's
Yes.
it's somewhere where I can go sit in a dark room for 2 hours and just whatever that world is in front of me, I can just escape into it. And I think, especially now that we're all in lockdown, whenever this video goes out, we could still be in lockdown. We don't know. But I think TV
Yeah.
and film in particular has just become such an important medium or outlet. I think we were already kind of going for a golden age of television anyway. But do you agree? Do you think TV is maybe now more important at the moment in
Oh
stories?
yes, I think it's at the moment people are finding it well, I mean, we're talking on a screen now. It's sort of it's become a huge way to communicate, and I think a lot of people are working their way through box sets. It's interesting because of the experience of going to the cinema. Is it's I kind of find it as a storyteller. I think it's quite forgiving because you're in the dark and you've got this enormous screen and you're quite easily sucked in. TV used to be called the little box in the corner, but it's not. But most TVs are quite a big box now, so it's easier to grab somebody's attention from a great big box. But I think books can be equally absorbing. But I think a book writer. Or a writer on a smaller screen has to sort of work particularly hard to be compelling to get people's attention. And I think there is so much wonderful TV about at the moment. I spend all my time just saying, oh yeah, I meant to watch. Yeah, it's on my list. It's on my list. Everyone keeps talking about the most, all these wonderful shows that are happening. So I think an issue at the moment is there's so much TV happening. Standing out is, of course, the challenge. Getting people to your show. I think there was a time when I was young, because I can just about remember there only being 3 British channels, where the fact that something was on TV a lot of people would have seen it, whereas now that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're maybe spoiled for choice, maybe. I think it's even harder now. Like, I remember years ago when I was a kid going to Blockbuster Video, which was a rental shop where you could rent videos of people
Yes, I
willing to
remember
rent
it.
them. And I remember I would obviously go to the kids section, and mum and dad or whatever would do their thing, and I would just stare. I just this vivid memory of just looking up, and just there's these massive columns and shelves of all these videos,
Yes.
and you're like, you have 5 minutes, pick two, and you're like, I don't know what ones to pick. And now I feel like, and then as time went on, and you have your own DVD collection, and again, right, want to watch films tonight, you stand in front of your own massive shelf, right, come on, pick something. And then now it's just the same for Netflix and Amazon and Disney. Like,
Yes.
oh, what? My time is so limited. What am I going to watch? I think it's just, I think that's a bit of a struggle.
It is, yes. There's just so much choice.
So going back slightly, what was your kind of first big break, as it were? What was your first big commission as a writer?
Um, I suppose I was sort of working on a few sort of fronts at once, because I'd written a stage adaptation of Little Women, and that we've as a producer sort of we eventually took founders and we eventually took that to the West End. But so there was that. But I think at the same time, kind of separately, I was working on TV, and me and my sister were there was a thing called BBC Talent in 2001, I think it was, where there was sort of a competition to write a radio sitcom script, and I think me and my sister were finalists in that, and we kind of thought that would be our big break, but it wasn't. But, I also sent stuff to BBC Wales, and I think I and they had a group of writers they were developing, and that actually turned out to be my break, because through that I got work. I wrote some radio plays. And I did an episode of Doctors, and I also wrote an episode initially of the story of Tracy Beaker, and that I ended up writing a few more episodes of that, and that led to quite a lot of work for CBBC. So I think in terms of the job which sort of gave me steady work in an area, I think the story of Tracy Beaker would have been that. And of course, it's it was a wonderful show. It had a sequel, Tracy Beaker Returns, and then another sequel, The Dumping Ground, and I wrote on all those. And I got to meet Jacqueline Wilson, who's just the fantastic writer and a lovely person. So yeah, I guess it was that.
Was it intimidating at all, like writing for Jackie? Yeah,
Yes, I think at first, I mean, I think I'm because of my age. I think I was. Tracy Beaker was published originally nearly 30 years ago, and I was just that bit too old to sort of, to have sort of read her work myself as a child. But I was sort of aware of what um, you know, how huge she is, and what a hero she is to children, and not destroying her books was quite important. And I've worked on a few Jacqueline Wilson adaptations. Actually, I ended up doing a stage adaptation of Hetty Feather, and I worked on the TV show of Hetty Feather, and a stage adaptation of a lovely book she wrote called Wave Me Goodbye, which is about evacuees in World War II. And yeah, she's lovely, and she's not at all an intimidating person. She's very warm, but yeah, you always get intimidated by the thought of wrecking somebody else's work, don't you?
Like, I'm so sorry. I think some writers who are either just trying to break into the industry, I think they miss the opportunity, or they kind of disregard children's TV. And I know we're not supposed to call it children's TV for some reason. I was on a panel and someone said, no, it's not. You don't think of it as children's TV. And you're like, okay, what do we call it? All the bigwigs call it children's TV. But I think some writers kind of disregard it as a career path. Do you feel, you know,
I understand that, because I think it um the way, I mean, when I keep going on about when I was young, but there wasn't such a thing as the CBBC channel in those days. That there was CBBC. They made shows that went on BBC One and BBC Two, and when I started writing for children's, they they still did. And I think it's kind of a shame that that's gone, because I think a lot of, you know, there is a sort of divide between children's and family, and family would be sort of exactly the same but have bigger stars, a bigger budget, and would go out at Christmas. So, you know, it would be you know, Wurzel Gummidge starring Mackenzie Crook, or an adaptation of a David Walliams or something. And children's, as in CBBC and CBBS, are working on much smaller budgets, but you know, as you know, that can inspire people to be more creative, but sort of shoving it all on its own channel does kind of leave it as a thing on its own. And there are actually quite a lot of shows, I believe, on this channel that parents could enjoy watching with their kids. So it could be watch along, it could be family, but putting it on CBBC discourages that. But that's just my personal, very specific right, as somebody that works in that genre. But in terms of writers in general, I would say it is not, writing for children's TV is not a break into TV, it's a break into writing for children's TV. So if you want to write that sort of material, then you should think about it. If you don't, if you have no interest in it, don't do it thinking it's going to get you somewhere else, because it probably won't. If you want to write for soap, head for soap. If you, but I think, you know, if for instance you love Doctor Who, that obviously had its genesis as a children's show, although people would say it's not a children's show, but it's still a show that is watched a lot by children. So I think there are, if you, you know, if you sort of think you'd like to write something like Doctor Who, then maybe children's is something you could consider, because as we were saying earlier, it's very hard still in Britain to get high concept, or, you know, anything that's not sort of very naturalistic, set in the present day. It's very hard to get anything else away. And children's, you know, that I've written for quite a few children's shows with a sci-fi or supernatural elements. So, you know, if you're interested in that sort of genre, I think children's is a great place to try. And the thing is, you should never talk down to your audience, whatever you're doing. And I think so I think children's is a good place for writers who you know, you have to take your story and your characters very seriously, every bit as seriously as you would if you were writing for adults. I mean, sorry, that seems incredibly obvious, but we are very serious about what we do over at CBBC, and we take our characters and their emotions and their lives very seriously.
I mean, so I watched the first episode of the new Demon Headmaster when it went out, and I'll say something that's going to anger you, but I didn't know it was out yet. I didn't know it was available. Yeah, that was the reaction I was looking for.
No, I'm not surprised. And most people didn't, and I think it's a shame that CBBC does not get much publicity. I think we were unlucky that we went out starting at the October half term up to Christmas, which is a nice slot for it. But there was no Doctor Who going out, and Doctor Who started going out in the January. And actually, they did trail some CBBC shows before Doctor Who, but they weren't sci-fi shows. So I was thinking, oh, if we'd only been still going out in the January, we could have got that trail. But yeah, CBBC shows don't get much publicity. We did really well on iPlayer, and really our ratings increased a lot over the time that the show was going out. So we gradually built an audience. But yes, I mean, and I suppose, you know, as we were saying before, in this sort of age where there's a lot of television, it's hard for anything to get attention. So you know, every viewer is you know, fought for. So it's always good. So at least you watched it.
Well, not only did I watch it, because I didn't know what to expect, because I watched the original when it went out.
Yeah.
What, was it the 90s, 95, 96 or something?
It was, yeah, the mid-90s.
And it was terrifying. Like, it was absolutely terrifying. And I was like, oh, well, it'll be fine now. It's not going to be super terrifying. But no, from the off, it's creepy.
Oh, brilliant.
Just when he's up high looking out on everything as well at the end of the first episode. every episode, I was like, oh, because when I got back round to it, because I was busy doing other things, like all of it was available. So as
Yeah.
soon as it comes up, it goes next episode starting. You're like, yeah, okay, I can cope with that. And you'd lose
Brilliant.
8 hours of your life. But I wouldn't say it was necessarily a kids show. I don't think any audience of any age could watch that, because no matter how old you are, you could relate to that subject matter, even if it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There's the common themes are in there that doesn't scream, this isn't for you. So
I like to think so, and we did have quite a lot of appreciative comments from adults watching it. A lot of who would come to it because they'd seen the 90s series, or they'd read the books when they were kids. But I think it's that there's we talked a lot about there's something just very universal in this idea of this teacher who everyone fears, and I love that shot of him up on the tower looking over his domain, and and I think sort of scary wise, we got away with quite a lot in that show because it's not sort of blood and guts. It's sort of a psychological scare, which hopefully it'll stay with kids for 20 years like the original did. But I think on children's it sort of there are a lot of sort of things you can't do, but but there are a lot, but there are things you can.
Yeah.
And I think I think so, things are made by CBBC, but they could be enjoyed by a wider audience. Yeah.
Again, so the Demon Headmaster was adapted from books. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, by Gillian Cross.
So how was that process of adapting that compared to doing Tracy Beaker? Could you find common themes in there, even though it was kind of like a sci-fi kind of thriller compared to the Dumping Ground? What was your kind of approach to that?
I think I think the book has got this wonderful central concept of the headmaster and his hypnotic powers, and then but obviously he is the villain, so you're not really following his story. So that he's the antagonist, so you're following the story of these young people, and so in a way that has similarities to the Dumping Ground, because you're thinking, and I think what CBBC does do is it sort of puts young people at the heart of the story. They're not they have responsibility. They're not just there to show the consequences of adults' actions or to be victims of adult actions, although of course they're the ultimate victims of an adult action, but over 10 episodes they fight back. So there are similarities there. And obviously Tracy Beaker was based on a book. The Demon Headmaster was based on a specific, the series 1 was based on a book, Total Control, which Gillian had written. I think it's about the 8th Demon Headmaster book, and she wrote it decades after the original, and for the first time she used a new group of kids. And with series 1, it was interesting because we had I think the book was probably about 3 episodes worth of story, and we had to fill 10. And rather than going, right, we're going to tell that story, then we're going to tell new stories, we sort of used a lot of the book in episodes 1, 2, and 10, and then put a lot of stuff in the middle. So we sort of filled it out. Whereas with Tracy Beaker, I think a lot the stories from the book mostly happened in series 1, and then it ran for several more series. So there are different ways you can do it, but I think a lot of the time with even if you're adapting a book, particularly for the sort of show where they want it to be a long-running format, you get some characters and tone and locations and all sorts of wonderful ideas from the book, but the work of building the story and structuring, you pretty much have to do almost from scratch, as if you're writing an original. I think probably most adapters will tell you that.
So am I right in thinking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is your kind of official role on Demon Headmaster, and I'm only talking about this one so much as because that's the most recent one, is your official role showrunner?
Funnily enough, we've been doing some work with the Writers Guild and about the role of the writer showrunner, and we've been consulting with people from with showrunners from America and showrunners here. To think of, you know, the showrunner. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's ever an official title is written down, but I think, for instance, obviously Doctor Who had Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat, now Chris Chibnall, because they are executive producers as well as lead writer, and they have hiring and firing power. I think a lead writer that's not an executive producer is not quite as powerful as that. So I couldn't call myself a showrunner, but I am the lead writer. So I saw an American showrunner kind of describe it quite that sort of in America, sort of the showrunners at the top, and they sort of work down or sort of, you know, delegate to all the departments. Whereas in Britain, you've kind of got a producer at the top or an exec producer, and you've got the lead writer's kind of head of the script department, and so you're sort of on the same level with those, and don't always have all the lines of communication between the different departments. Sorry, it's because we've been doing this work with the Writers Guild on it.
I'm hoping lots of writers are going to watch this, and I want them to be as informed as possible, because nobody tells you this stuff. Nobody. When I was just starting out professionally writing, he says I've got credit to his name, apart from my own work. I stupidly went and wrote a spec script for Doctor Who, thinking, aha, this is wonderful. And then I learned quite quickly from bang to write, yeah, we're not supposed to write scripts based on shows that are around here.
But certainly in the past in America, that did used to be the thing to do with long running shows. I mean, I think there's often
that's still the case in America.
Yeah, I think all right. I have heard that or writing a script for an existing successful show is a big thing in America, but they often tell you don't write it for the show you're applying for, because they will have very specific things that they know. So but you know, if you wrote an episode of, I don't know, it's finished now, but like if you wrote an episode of, say, The Good Place and sent it to somebody else, that would be something they would want to read. But you're right, I'm sure your episode of Doctor Who's great. I mean, I'm impressed that you did one. I think that, but yes, that, and
I was just
like, yeah.
It's I think it's intimidating. I think like you know, just the thought of you saying, you know, write an episode of The Good Place, I would dare try and touch The Good Place. The Good Place, yes. You know, it's just peak TV. There's a Nickelodeon writing program that's going on right now, and I think the deadline, June it opens, and they've like, here 10 shows, send us a script for one of them, and the two that I kind of closest to is American Dad, because it's a show I've watched for a very long time.
Oh yes.
And Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I think Brooklyn Nine-Nine,
I love both those shows.
I think Brooklyn Nine-Nine is kind of like the equivalent of Cheers now, in the sense that it's got the cold open and the ensemble characters, and it all kind of takes place in the police station. And I'm like, I don't think I've got the stomach to try and add a script for Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I just find that terribly nerve-wracking. But yeah, Doctor Who.
I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but I would be very intimidated to write a script for it, I have to say. Yeah, so I think it's right. You're right. I think people don't maybe get them out, particularly because a lot of books on script writing are American, and Americans do sort of American companies would expect more as a norm to see a spec for an existing show. But in a way, I think it's probably easier or sort of, you know, clearer for British writers that sort of by and large people won't want to read a spec for somebody else's show. They'd rather see your original work. So there's that. And I think also there is the legal aspect that, you know, I've even occasionally been careful with people that if somebody says, I've got a great idea for a Demon Headmaster story, and I read it, and unknown to them there's something very similar in the episode I'm writing at the moment, then I lay myself open to charges of plagiarism. So, and I think that's something which shows are very, very careful about. So that's another reason why it's probably just best to write an original spec.
Yeah, I think I inadvertently said, I think it would be good if this happened in the Demon Headmaster, and you said, yeah, wait till episode 6. I was like, God damn it.
Oh, sorry.
Because I've got one of those brains where I go, oh, okay, so you've got that universe and those characters, so here's what you can, yeah. It's just the way my brain
Well,
works.
at least if by that point, I guess we'd already made it, so it was fine,
Yeah.
rather than me saying like, oh God, yeah, I'm saying that we're working on it, but you might not believe me. I might just have scribbled it down, going, brilliant, Frey, let's have that.
It had been well and truly in an edit suite at that point, and I think it was being edited up in Glasgow as well.
Oh yeah, it was.
Because I was running for a facilities house for a few days, and you were on the board.
Yes.
Edit Suite 4 or something like that. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa. I was to this day I'm angry that I didn't know that it was being filmed up here. I would have just jumped on it.
Oh.
So obviously you've got a lot of credits under your belt. You've done a lot of great work, and you have a huge catalogue of work. But do you still have spec scripts? Are you still expected when you're pitching work on a show? Do you still need to send them a spec, or can you just go Demon Headmaster, Dumbing Grounds, worst witch?
I think in terms of original specs, my agent would love it if I wrote some, particularly an adult original spec. I think that because I've sort of been constantly working on various things, there hasn't been much time for doing specs. But absolutely, and I think most writers who are sensible and more hardworking than me say, oh yes, I always write a new spec of my original voice every single year, just to make sure I've always got something fresh and up to the minute to send out. So that is the advice that everyone would give you, including my agent. So do as I say, not as I do. Keep those original specs. But I think also it's obviously people offer me work all the time on shows aimed at 7 to 11, because I've done a lot of that. And if they want to read anything, there's a stack of scripts existing that they can read. But if you want to branch out into different sorts of work, as indeed I do, it's always, I do have some things I've been working on, but yeah, I think it's good, again, good advice that a lot of people will give. It's good to have a lot of different specs in, with different tones, aimed at different audiences, showing different aspects of things that you're interested in. I know all the good advice, I just don't do it.
I'm not criticising you, Emma.
Sorry, if I was shouting at myself.
This isn't, yeah, it's all the ruse. This is an interview. I had a phone call from our agent. Fraser, can you sort her out? Can you move her up? Jamie Matheson says that he has 10 spec scripts at any one time, just ready. And I think I've maybe written 10, but I think I would only be comfortable sending out 3.
Oh, well, that's pretty good. That's great. 3.
But it's interesting because so you can send your spec script to somebody. So I aim for peers like yourself, Debbie, Phil, because I don't believe in sending them to my friends, because they'll just go, oh yeah, it's brilliant, that's amazing, and I don't think that's useful for anybody. I think you need the harshest voice in the room to convince you to kill your darlings. But it's funny because you could send it out to one person who goes, oh yeah, I do this and this and this, and then you send it to another person like Debbie, and she'll send you back 12 pages of notes.
Yes, I think that's that's very true. Because the thing is, everything, I know a lot of people will talk about the science of screenwriting and how they're absolute truths, but I think in general almost everything is subjective, and even I think I'm never quite sure there is such a thing as a bad idea, but there's a lot in how things are handled. Quite often I'm looking at a show and I'm thinking, maybe the internet explodes about a certain story decision, and I might think, actually, I don't think that story decision was bad in itself, but if they wanted to do that, they should have done blah 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 to just sort of set it up. When you're actually working on a show and you're getting notes from people who are also working on that show, they can be contradictory. So it's all subjective.
I could chat to you for weeks on this stuff. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to get to the nut of it. How do you deal with, so on a show like Demon Headmaster, where you're the lead writer, not showrunner? A friend of mine who worked for BBC Scotland said, don't say that you're a showrunner of Cops and Monsters, because they'll just think that you were a runner on that show. They don't know what a showrunner.
Oh, I see.
She was like, no, they'll think that you're a runner on it. That's not help. Just put down creator, it'll be fine. So how do you? what's it like when it comes to like getting notes from higher ups and stuff? Do you find are you banging your head a lot against them, or do you find it's quite collaborative, or do you cry
I
in the
think it's
corner?
a bit of both. I think, and I think it's certainly there are times when you're banging your head, but then, other other times, sometimes the same. I mean, and I think there are certainly people that you get on with better than others, and that you're just a better fit to work with than others. But I think nobody has an easy time. Um, I wouldn't, particularly know, but sometimes I see episodes by very sort of top writers, and I sort of think, how did the script editor let them get away with that plot hole or coincidence? And I wonder
I
if
think I
they've
know who
become too
we're
big
talking
to
about
take notes.
there.
so so I sort of think, oh, I don't want to become too big to take notes, because I need people to go, no, hang on a minute.
Yeah, now I kind of think I know exactly who you're talking about, and that's fine.
No, I never said that.
And I agree. Are you looking to move away from children's? Are you wanting to do more?
Not move away, just sort of expand and do sort of more things, really. I think yeah, you know, I love this. I love the sort of work I do, and I love CBBC, but it's quite a small pond. So one day I'll just be too annoying and wind up the wrong person too much, and they won't want me anymore. So I think you've got to keep your eye out for other sort of opportunities.
The industry. It's a wonderful place to
Yeah.
work. I was working with Katrina Bryan a wee while ago, who was Nina in Nina and the Neurons.
Oh yes, I know her.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to be a runner, not a showrunner, a runner on Nina and the Neurons. It was my first ever gig, and it was the 9th out of 10 series that they're doing. Katrina had enough at that point, and we got on quite well. We chatted a wee bit here, and I was kind of her runner, more or less. And then when we were doing an episode of Cops and Monsters, we needed somebody to be this kind of nice werewolf support group leader who was also a werewolf. And it was a small part, but it was a good part. And I was like, I'm going to ask Katrina. So I went through her agent and everything. And then she, oh yeah, Katrina would love to do it. Here's her rate, blah, blah, blah. Brilliant. And then we stepped onto the set on location. And I was like, I wonder if she'll remember me as the runner who worked with her. And she was like, Fraser, how are you? Lovely to see you, darling. Ma, ma, ma. And so we did all our stuff, and she had a great time. And she goes, oh, whenever you need me, just call me. And I said, all right, okay. And she goes, no, I'm desperate to get into grown-up telly.
Oh yes.
But she said she's sort of got pigeonholed into doing.
Mm,
But she, before she did Nina and stuff, she did do like Taggart.
yes,
She
yes.
did do her stuff. So I just wondered if, both from an acting and a writing point of view, is it difficult once you're in one area to get into the next? Are you
I
finding
think
most
it
of
is, and and I think, I'd like to sort of hope that, for instance, because obviously I've done a lot of other of stuff that's not for children, but yeah, I have worked a lot in children's, and I sort of feel, I sort of feel like I would hope that people wouldn't sort of, if they thought I was perfect for a job otherwise, they wouldn't say, oh, we won't have her because she's done a lot of children's TV. But on the other hand, children's TV doesn't necessarily open doors to adult TV, as I was saying. So, you know,
which is
if
slightly insane in my point of view.
well, well, I think it depends. I suppose, it just comes back to, as my agent will tell you, just keep a range of spec scripts handy with lots of different different sort of feels to them, so they fit on different shows. Because I think I suppose that with an actor you can get someone to come in and read, and I think yeah, there is certainly a risk for actors being pigeonholed, and writers too, which is probably another reason why I say sort of you know only try to write for children's TV if you actually want to. There's no point in thinking it will lead elsewhere.
I came up with the perfect idea for a children's TV show about
Oh yeah.
4 years ago. and it was a young girl who one day discovers a dinosaur in her back garden. And
Yeah.
as it turns out, there was a kindly old scientist who had genetically engineered this adorable dinosaur. And through him and the dinosaur, she'd learn all the history of the Jurassic period in history. But there was also shady government people who were trying to get the dinosaur. So there was a bit of drama and a bit of lesson. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, yeah, I love dinosaurs as a kid. I still love dinosaurs. That could work. That could work. And then I think about a week later, I saw an advert on I think it was CITV. Next week on My Pet Dinosaur. I was like,
Oh no.
gone out the window.
Oh,
However, I've cheekily approached the production company and said, if I can ever get a job on this, interesting.
good. Yes.
What is your advice to new writers? What's if you could go back and tell Emma of the past anything to help, what would the advice be?
Gosh, I don't know. I'd probably say the same as I would to myself now. You know, work harder, write some more spec scripts. Um, yeah, it it is hard, and I think, you know, and I think the sort of the way that things always change, and sort of the ways of getting in and the opportunities sort of tend to exist for a while and then vanish. And you know, I think I was lucky to get the job on Tracy Beaker that I did at the time. Um, I suppose I can only sort of really advise sort of what I did, which was sort of I was sort of trying on various fronts at once, and I also did some script reading, which I think sort of taught I think that sort of taught me a lot, but also it sort of, you know, I made some contacts at various companies through that. Um, yeah,
I think
yes,
it's
fight the battle on various fronts at once, I
yeah,
would
I
say.
think it's tough because there's more television now than ever.
Yeah.
So you'd think there'd be more opportunities. But I personally feel, and this isn't, let's help Fraser get an agent. This is, it's more, I think, and I spoke to a high up BBC person in Scotland. I won't name names. But basically, what happened was there was a new head of BBC Scotland, and I emailed them and I said, here's everything I've done. I've hit a wall. I'm not asking for a job. I'm just asking for some advice. What can I do to kind of move forward? And they came back and went, oh, all brilliant, all great. You're doing all the right things. I want you to speak to this person, this person, this person. And they set me up with a higher up. And they talked down to me for 45 minutes about how brilliant the BBC were and how they got away with murder. They not even spoke. It was just as the night manager had went out, and they were like, "It's incredible, Fraser. It's 10 million, and we paid nothing for it. It was incredible. It was incredible." It's like, okay. Can we talk about what I do next? And they told me that their advice was, if I want to get anywhere, I need to write on River City first in
Right.
Scotland. And I said, okay, but what if I don't feel I have a voice
Mm.
for River City? Because I don't feel like I have I personally don't think interior, the pub, a vampire walks in. Like, I just don't think it's going to work somehow. But she didn't seem to have much more than that. So I just wonder,
I think it's difficult for writers that don't want to that writers that don't want to do soap type things, writers that do want to do as I did, do you know, supernatural, magic, sci-fi, that sort of thing, because I think that the standard advice, I mean, I'm Welsh, and I sort of got a break through that, being on Tracy Beaker because it was made in Wales at the time. But the standard advice in England used to be go and do casualty, doctors. I think they sort of funnel people a lot through doctors. Then the idea was you then do casualty, Holby City, possibly EastEnders. The trouble is, of course, it doesn't work because people do soaps and then they're pigeonholed as soap writers, which is every bit as much as a pigeonhole as being a children's writer. So I think actually, yes, I do have advice to the young Emma, and because I've just remembered some advice that I shouldn't have taken. I had a script that was centered around a group of teens in a youth theatre, and it was about sexual abuse, and there was a lot of swearing and drug taking, and I think it got me in a few doors because people said, "Oh, we like the voice, we like this," but but obviously it wasn't sort of ready or good enough to be made yet. But the sort of advice was, oh, this will never be made for British TV because the protagonists are young, but um, but but the content is too adult. So it can't be made for young people because of the swearing and the drugs, but it can't be made for adult TV either because the protagonists are too young. So sort of give up on this, and you know, and I think what I should have said to myself is don't give up on the because it was only a few years later that Skins came
Yeah,
along.
I was going to say
And,
Skins was not
yeah,
long away.
so this was a few years before Skins, and then of course now you get Sex Education trying to reinvent that particular wheel. So it's just, I think, if it's, I think what they should have said to me, or what I should have said to myself, is write it better, make it better. Don't let yourself be told this will never be made for reasons like that. I think the truth is, a lot of things will never be, very few things are made, and things have to be really, really good. But Life on Mars, I think, was rejected for about 7 years. They kept pushing with that because, again, it's sort of, this all commissioners say they want something fresh, but they never, they're horrified by anything fresh unless it comes from a tried and trusted name. So it's an absolute catch-22 for new writers that want to do something unconventional. And I'm not going to name any names, but somebody in a very important position at the BBC was telling me the frustration of this. They're saying that sort of new writers doing something fresh, it's very hard to get away. The fresh ideas are only sort of allowed to come from very established writers. So yeah, sorry, I'm not solving that, but I think what I would say is, yes, don't be too easily told that. I suppose it goes back to what I was saying before about I'm not sure there's any such thing as a bad idea. I think it's execution. So don't be too easily fobbed off with your idea is terrible. It could just be your idea. You just got to keep working at it and making it better.
I think that's very good advice. I was once told at BBC Scotland that if I wanted my foot in the door as a writer, I'd have to wait till someone died. That was.
There is an element of that too.
I was like, oh, I'm pushing to myself now. And then what I've been sitting in all these, and I'm not looking for free advice, I promise you, but it's just I think it's so difficult as a new writer, and I feel like I've been a new writer for 5 years, just cracking away, and it's such conflicting advice because they say, well, if you want to get a TV show made, you need to get in a production company. You need to partner with a production company. Okay, great. So you go to the production company who you think suits your style or what you have, and the production company says, well, we can't accept anything unsolicited, so you need an agent. So when you have to try and get an agent, and trying to get an agent is trying to figure out the meaning of the universe. And you go to the agents and you say, right, I'm looking for an agent, and they go, well, until you've got a commission, we can't touch it. So it just seems to be this infuriating back and forth. And the advice seems to be every time you speak to a writer, they go, how did you get an agent? And every single one of them go, oh, well, I was lucky, really. It just sort of just happened. And you go,
I think it's true. It is the catch-22 and the luck. And I was talking about my the agent I've got. I think I initially sent her some stuff, and she sort of like, as sort of like, oh, I quite like it, but I'm not sure, sort of thing. And then through I sort of, and they sort of say, oh, come back when you've done a bit more. And I did come back when I'd done a bit more. And that time I'd done this group at BBC Wales, and I had the commission on Tracy Beaker. So yeah, so that was the bit of the catch
yeah.
of the catch-22 that I did have a contract and a commission to sort of show to her, and that's what changed things. But yes, I was very, very lucky, and I'm afraid there is sort of no way around having to be lucky. That's all you can do. But I think just as you can increase your chances of winning the lottery to an extent by buying a lot of tickets, I think it's worth, developing a lot of things, trying a lot of doors, hoping you can get your foot in one of them, really.
Yeah, no, it's all good advice. It's just I feel a lot of us are in the same boat. It all kind of bounces back and forth because we're on this London Screenwriters Festival as well, and I just put up a post and said, how do you guys as writers feel about trying to get an agent and trying to get that first break or whatever? you know, how do you deal with the no's and how do you try and get the yeses? People are coming back saying, oh, some of the best advice I got was that you don't need an agent. I was like, oh, that's how I've been told. So it's just,
Yes.
it's lots of conflicting advice. So we shall end on this, and it's a good one. What is your most favourite moment of your career so far? What's the highlight? Scaring
Just
a
trying to
whole new
think.
generation of kids witless.
I think maybe it was when my dream of getting Terence Hardiman back to be the headmaster again, and getting him and sort of getting a picture with him and the new headmaster. That was that was pretty cool. It's sort of, you know, that is a sort of dream that you know, I was sort of thinking like, oh, it'd be great to get him back to do a cameo, and sort of thinking, you know, will the producers all be happy with this? Yeah, and they were, and yeah, and he agreed to do it, and yeah, that was pretty exciting. I'll probably think of something better in a minute, but that was just no, not better. That was great. Sorry.
You shipped them all the way to Scotland and went, I want my photo of you. Yeah, you can do your scenes if you want. I just wanted the photo of you. But no, it's a phenomenal show. It's
You.
so nice to see that people are discovering it and watching it, and it's nice that it exists on iPlayer for people to find, and I think more and more people are finding it,
Does still.
which is great. So I hope that what happens next is just as successful. Um, Thank you so much for giving me your time. I appreciate, as I said, I could speak to you for hours and hours and hours on this stuff. But I will now do that awkward thing of hitting stop record, and then we can wrap up personally. But thank you so much for speaking to me today. Thank you for spending some time in lockdown. I know you should be, your agent has just got off the phone from me telling me to hurry up and get on some scripts. But until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to talk to you.